Aisha Hinds, you are the newest addition to the cast of Underground, playing no less than Harriet Tubman. When you first got when you first got offered this role, I guess the question that I'm asking is, how did it feel getting offered the role of such an important historical figure?
Yeah, I, I was blown away. I was blown away initially, already just being offered an opportunity to participate in this production, to be a part of this ensemble, to be a part of this project and this cast, because I was such a fan. They had, sort of created this amazing narrative and rolled it out in a way that was so engaging and edgy and enlightening, for a narrative that, many people have sort of felt like they've grown wary of. I was so grateful for the opportunity to one, join the cast, and then two, to do it in the role of Harriet Tubman. Was an overwhelming, enriching responsibility. It was something that, truly excited me, but at the same time, it was equally daunting for me, because she's such an icon and such a huge part of the historical fabric of this country. And so I simply just wanted to do her legacy justice.
And someone who hasn't been portrayed that often in film and television. So you're basically kind of starting from scratch in a way. Since there's no video that exists of Harriet Tubman, we've got photos.
YouTube, Harriet Tubman.
Well,
Right.
then what kind of research did you do in order to put yourself into that character?
I began with sort of exhausting myself with as much literature as I could. So I went to the two foundational books that I think sort of began to sort of tell her story, which Frederick Douglass, when he wrote a letter to her, he referenced, that he was so happy that her story was finally being told. And so Sarah Bradford wrote a book, and then she wrote a follow-up book, which was, I think, published in 1869, and I think the follow-up book may have come maybe 20 years later. So what happened was Harriet would literally go and sit with her and share her stories. And so they published this book in order to raise money to give to Harriet so she can continue the work of the cause. And so as she remembered stories, going forward, she would go back and meet with Sarah and say, I remembered this. And so Sarah wrote an addendum to that book. And so I started with those two books, but they're quite small. And so I read a book called Imagining a Life by Beverly Lowry, which was a larger text, and it sort of elucidated those two books and giving you these vignettes, that sort of created a breath of this woman and sort of gave you a sense of her humanity. Our Joe Pekowski, our creator, sort of describes what we've done in this season is that we've taken Superman, we've made her Clark Kent so that now you can understand how she becomes Superman, and that's sort of what Beverly Lowry's book did for me. It humanized her so much, which is how I was able to sort of build her out and give her some flesh and allow my breath to be, sufficient for her, because I had held her in such an iconic place. I think for many people, you sort of hold them in this space and sort of keep them in this glass casing because, they're one of our idolized heroes. And so I was used to that one-dimensional picture, which is of her at such an older age, and so just going back over her life, talking about her childhood, her family, her mother, her brothers and sisters, humanized her for me, and I could connect in that way, and in such, I was able to sort of build her out.
And in terms of putting yourself into the period of the mid-1800s, how did you, as a modern woman, do that?
The interesting thing was, so I got to set and I didn't even want to talk because I didn't think that my vocal register was, going to be sufficient to say the words of Harriet Tubman. But by the time I had also gotten to set, I had read so much literature, in addition to those three books that I mentioned, that her spirit had sort of consumed me. And so by the time I was there, I was in such a space that honestly, her presence was so overwhelming that I just sort of allowed her to move my limbs. In addition to that, we have such an amazing creative team, our production designer, our costume designers, our set design. They create such a world that you just walk into this space. And, you know, what is also interesting is that some of the conversations that we're having today are a mirror reflection of so many of the conversations that were had back then. And so you kind of are, you feel like you've moved so far ahead in time, but you really, you know, you're sort of stuck. And so it really wasn't so much, I wasn't preoccupied so much in thinking about how to make this period specific, so much as how do I just serve this story in an optimal way.
Well, you bring up an interesting point about the show, which is that it feels very contemporary, even though it's set in the past. And in that way, you're able to highlight continuing problems in the world today. Can you talk a little about that?
Right. Yes, exactly. You know, the foundation of this country is that, you know, it was built on the backs of the enslaved. And so, and it has sort of, slavery has sort of shaped the souls and the hearts of our humanity. And so, you know, the fruits are directly a product of the seed. And so if the seeds of this country was built on slavery, then of course, what we're seeing today is the fruit of seeds that were, you know, sown way back then. And so we sort of have to look at this system and realize that we are still very much, though we have quite a few resources and though we have quite a few luxuries, we still are in very much a pursuit for freedom. You know, it just begs to ask us, what is our definition of said freedom? You know, because it's much larger than a geographical point on a map. You know, it's about breaking down these systems that are put in place to systematically oppress people. You know, and so we have to, you know, examine the context for where that began and begin to uproot those systems from, you know, from now moving forward.
Absolutely. So I wanted to talk to you about an episode that's getting ready to air. Well, it will have aired by the time this video posts, so we're talking into the future here. It's the 6th episode entitled Menti, and I wanted to talk about it with you because you're basically the only one who talks during it. Tell us a little bit about that episode and what you thought when you first got the script.
So that was a life-changing experience for me. This was revolutionary material. They're telling this story in a revolutionary way. They're challenging people who watch television to watch television in such a different way. The way that they are telling this story is not a convention that they created for television or to make interesting or to make edgy. They're telling this story honoring the way that she told her story, which is, you know, in the research we discovered that Harriet Tubman literally would go around and give, you know, her version of these 1800 TED Talks. And so here we are doing the exact thing, telling her story, you know, as a TED Talk, which I've now, you know, sort of coined as a Tub Talk, you know, and so she's telling this story. And though I am the only one talking, this is a conversation, you know, she's in a room full of abolitionists and, you know, and so that is her direct audience, but then the audience of Underground is also in the audience. And then, you know, the rest of the world is a part of the audience. And I think it's material that's sort of been trying to engage others that, you know, beyond just Harriet. You know, they call it a solo performance, but it's a solo performance as much as childbirth is a solo performance. You know, there are so many elements that are necessary and so many people who are necessary to make this thing and to birth this baby. And so, you know, I salute WGN. I salute Anthony Hemingway and Misha Green and Joe Pakowski and, you know, and our incredible crew, you know, that served this story and this narrative and pushing it out so that we could definitely create this landmark television event on Wednesday.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, you know, as we've said, that it's basically a giant monologue, and in it, Harriet is telling her life story. So talk about painting that picture for us. I mean, it's a very theatrical thing to
Yeah.
do, and the onus is all on the performer. So kudos to you.
You know, the material sort of possessed me, you know. It is one of those things that I can't, parts of me can't even remember being in it or even saying it. When I received the material, trust, I was so afraid of it that I would call Misha and Joe, and like I would argue against like small little things so that they could take out as many words as possible so that they could condense it. And so I'd be like, is that a double negative? Maybe you should take out that one note, you know? And so I was so afraid of it. But then once I really dug into the story just began to tell itself, because there's so many layers to it. There are so many things that you learn about her, and the way that she traveled, and the way that she thought, and the way that she moved through her emotions, and talk about her family, and talk about, you know, what inspired, you know, this purpose that was so much larger than her. It possessed me, which I was happy for, because I ended up not getting the script until, you know, about a week before production. And so I was so panicked, because in my mind, you know, here I thought we were taking this, you know, theatrical approach. And so I was like, oh, surely we'll have the respective time that you have to audition, you know, as in the theater. However, no, that, you know, to rehearse rather. And so I thought we would have this exhaustive rehearsal schedule, and that was not the case. You know, I had just enough time to get the material in my hand, to read it, and to just trust that if I take it in day by day, that hopefully it will come out, you know? And so it was a divine visitation from Harriet Spirit herself that sort of guided us, much like she guided so many people to freedom. She guided us across the finish line of finishing that production, which we, you know, only had 3 days to do.
Wow, that's 3 days. Were there specific passages that were particularly challenging to you from a performance standpoint?
Yeah, that obviously sharing about the beatings and being beaten the way that she was for no reason whatsoever. Because again, you sort of think about Harriet Tubman as this hero, and you have sort of idolized her and made her this icon, and you forget to remember how much she suffered before she lived the larger part of her life as a free woman. And so just reflecting on that and remembering that, and then speaking her very words to share those stories, was something that that truly sort of welled me up, you know? And so it was an honor, but it was also very much a painful reflection to consider that, you know, these were the things that she endured. But it's also such a beacon of hope, you know, to know that she was able to endure these things, and that she escaped and then put herself in danger again and again, knowing what the fate could possibly be, and that it could be 10 times worse than what she endured. But she did it again and again and again for a purpose greater than herself. And so that really infused me with such a great sense of hope.
Absolutely. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the actual production, the 3-day production. Working with Anthony Hemingway as the director, what did he give you that helped you with your performance?
Anthony Hemingway is one of the most amazing human beings on the planet, first of all. And then if you add to that the fact that he is such a efficient, thorough, thoughtful director, he creates an atmosphere where everyone is desiring to bring their best to the table. He draws out just a joy to show up for some of the hardest work that I think many of us have ever sort of approached in our life. You know, it was difficult work, and it was it was a challenge that none of us were prepared for. None of us had ever, done before. No one had ever, our writers had never written a solo performance, a one-person show. I had never performed a one-person show. He had never directed a one-person show. His crew had never shot 17 and 5/8 a page in one single day, and so, but he was the captain of the show. I get so emotional talking about Anthony Hemingway because he brought such a huge heart and an open spirit and such a giving spirit. The first day of our 3-day shoot, he came into the trailer, they knocked on the door and they were like, Anthony wants to see you. And which is customary, sometimes directors will come and they give you some, preliminary notes to think about before you go out there. And so I thought he was coming with, some preliminary notes and things to think about and how we're going to approach the day. And he came into my trailer and he held my hand and he prayed with me. And that was foremost important because Harriet Tubman, above all else, was guided by such a spiritual compass. And so for him to know that the most important thing I needed to start this shoot was to be covered in prayer and to just invite her spirit to guide us, it's immeasurable. Where Anthony Hemingway goes, I will go any day. He's an amazing person, and anyone and everyone who has worked with him says it.
He certainly is, yeah. I wanted to ask you about the ending of the episode, because there's a moment where Harriet sort of breaks the fourth wall. And makes reference to a slogan that we've unfortunately been hearing for a few months now. Talk a little bit about that moment, because like I said, it's breaking the fourth wall and making a timely reference in a very sly way. The importance of doing that at the end.
The thing is that the entire theme of this season is citizen versus soldier. And so it's obvious that we're living in a time that we're dealing with many of the oppressions that are, familiar, sadly familiar to us from the past. And so it's important. It's wonderful that we sort of have this show as a reference and a context for those who have lived through this and who have risen up, against evils that, have sort of set themselves against the lesser. And so in that moment, it is engaging our audiences and engaging people to sort of examine themselves and ask the question, are you a citizen or are you a soldier? Are you going to stand by and sort of watch the injustice and watch what's happening in the world? Or are you going to actively engage and become a soldier? Because it is our active engagement that is necessary to sort of really take care of this country the way that it truly deserves to be taken care of.
And one of the extraordinary things about the show is you see that transformation of people into activists and heroes. I mean, I think about the relationship in the show between you and Rosalie, Journey Smollett Bell's character, the way that you teach her and inspire her to take her own destiny into her own hands.
Right. Because when we think about the Underground Railroad, a lot of times we sort of think of that singular person being Harriet Tubman as, as the cornerstone of the story. However, there were so many people involved in the Underground Railroad, so many people that she depended on for help and support and guidance. And so it's important to know that that it is all of our responsibility, to sort of help the other, to guide the other, to teach another. And so she's sort of passing that torch onto Rosalie, and it's in the same way, it's our responsibility for, that which we know we should absolutely teach and empower one another, so that all of us can stand in a position of power.
Well, it's a great show, and I'm glad that you're a part of it.
I'm thrilled to be a part of it. Thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you so much, Aisha.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.